Welcome to another episode of PostAGI Podcast. We are your host, Sreeram and Soubhik. My guest today is Emad Mostaque. Emad is one of the few people who has not just helped build the current wave of generative AI as the founder of Stability, but has spent the last couple of years thinking seriously about what comes after the AGI debate itself. He's one of those few people in the industry who brings both the builder energy and the thought leader energy. In his recent work, especially The Last Economy, he has been writing about the structural shift the machine intelligence forces, how firms will work, how should we measure the value, and what social contract looks like when intelligence becomes the dominant input. Imad, glad to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, in today's episode, instead of rehashing whether AGI is coming or not, we are going straight to the harder question. What comes next on the other side of the AGI, the post AGI? What survives, what does not? So, my first question, Imad, what does post AGI actually mean to you? This show, our show, but the name is a post AGI podcast. It starts with the premise that the AGI debate is the easy part and the harder questions begin after. In The Last Economy, you write from the same vantage point, not arguing whether the AGI happens or not, but describing what comes after. When you say we are at the end of the economy we have inherited, what specifically about machine intelligence makes the world on the other side of the AGI structurally different from the one we are now? What, how, like what parts of today's economy, society might be unprepared for that post AGI?
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice big topic, right? People's definitions of AGI have been shifting dramatically. Like when I started in AI years and years ago, it was like human capability, right? And human capability and the Turing test that we haven't heard of for a long time isn't that amazing, but it is very general. So, just like people's IQ is on this Poisson distribution, right? Half of all people approximately are under 100 IQ. Now we have these 120 IQ AIs that can do just about anything. We're like, well, AGI isn't here yet. Like, what is AGI? So we take the definition of an AGI now apparently as being better than any given human at anything. What happens at that point? Well, at that point, all knowledge work, you are already the dumbest people in the room. You'll definitely be the dumbest person on the team in the room then. Because the ability of an AI to one-shot almost any piece of knowledge work will be almost instant. And we're anchored in that we don't really understand what that is until we use AIs that are 1,000 words a second or 10,000 words a second. Like the example I give is Talus, Tallus. They have this thing, Chat Jimmy, and it's a Llama 8B model, but it goes at 16,000 tokens a second. So you type in anything and it's instant. It's 20 nanoseconds of response. It's not like Claude that you wait for. And they're etching DeepSeek and GLM level models onto the silicon now, because that's how they can be so fast. Then you realize it's going to be smarter than me, and it's going to be 1 microsecond of time. And that's before we even get to quantum computing. Like there isn't a quantum computing problem that takes days or hours. It's not like it crunches through. So in that world, in that economy, any knowledge-based work is basically you are a negative because it can trade, it can build websites, it can do other things better than you can. And we're already seeing that today. A year ago, it was very difficult to make a good website, as a practical example. Now, if you go and you say, I want a website for Sreeram or Soubhik, make it go hard, you will get a website that goes hard, It'll look pretty good. And again, that process takes like tens of thousands of dollars down to one prompt. And almost certainly it'll be one shot, just like, again, we've experienced so many of these AI conversations going from long down to one shot. So the value and demand for negative value human labor cognitively is like zero. There isn't a market for that. Then beyond that, you have robots now. Yesterday, you had a company, Genesis AI, coming out using a company called Wuji Hands, and it's like playing the piano and it's picking up stuff randomly with just 200,000 hours of training. Robotics is basically solved now for manual dexterity. And if you look at the cost of a robot, it's about $1.50 an hour, all in, including depreciation. Like you think about the Unitary robots when they first came out, to now they're doing like Kung Fu and all sorts of things. And now they got these clever little hands. That's like
or the crazy dances that they do in the music shows.
Exactly. Like it's the same hardware. It's just the brain got smarter. But the brain that's driving these things, someone just figured out a way to train them to play tennis, and they can already like get to human level on tennis just by watching tennis being played. Like, they are general few shot learners now. And so physical activity as well, they can do just about anything, because what these models have is economies of scope. You train the models, you build a robot once, and it's not like it is a plumbing robot. The plumbing robot can also do open heart surgery, can also fly a fighter jet. Like, the actual amount of compute, I think a year or two ago, to actually beat a human with a fighter jet is a Raspberry Pi level. There's a company that did that, you know? And so we're not so special anymore. And again, this economic future is one whereby in the private sector, we will almost certainly be outcompeted almost everywhere except for the places that really require humans. And even then, there's this question, like, we have this AI movie night in a few weeks in London. We're showing Blade Runner, right? I can tell you the companies from China and Japan are getting really good with human level skin and eyes and movement and things like that. I think we're less than 10 years away from I can't tell it's a robot on the street.
Like synthetics.
Synthetics,
Just like-
exactly. I mean, all the science fiction is becoming science fact at the same time, right? And so even things like pop stars and celebrities and things like that, like who's a human and who's a robot and who's a fully digital one, you know, like you have all these vloggers already and things like that. It's going to get very strange. That's the only thing I can kind of say. But again, if it's something intellectual or physical, I don't think you can compete with an AI.
So given that you mentioned that this human labor is getting outcompeted, the human knowledge work is getting outcompeted. So what does our, like after AJ, what does the economy for humans, the institutions for human look like? Like what should like they be then in that case?
So, I mean, again, we've kind of seen when people get outcompeted many times in history, right? And you always pivot somewhere. And we pivoted up the tree and had these inversions. Now it's where do you pivot to from intelligence? It's nowhere really. Instead, it's like the flip side is this is a fantastic potential thing whereby why should I work if the robots work for me? You know, what if they're communally owned? What if I get money because I am human versus from needing to work? But then you still need to have meaning. You still need to have other things. Like in ancient Greece, you got paid obols to be a citizen and participate democratically. You know, you don't get paid to participate democratically right now. You don't get paid to improve your community. This is a question of the social contract, because what you're really going towards is that the idiot tax for everything has decreased. The idiot tax is this thing that Elon Musk came up with. Like, you know, he wants like, I want to build rockets to get to Mars. And then he tried to buy a rocket. It was really hard. And so he's like, I'm going to build my own rocket. And then he looked at all the parts and there was this idiot tax on every single part. Like, I want to have this specific cog. That'll be $20,000. Like, wait, what? It's the price that you pay for every part of the supply chain. You will be able to build the extension in your house with a team of robots for basically the cost of materials in a couple of years. And your wife will be much happier, you know? Like, you'll be able to build anything or make anything for almost nothing but the cost of materials, which is just fantastic. And that leads us to this Star Trek future, because why shouldn't it be abundant, right? But that then does call into question our current conceptualizations of capitalism and capital and other things, whereby how do we get to communal ownership? How do we get people paid for being human? You know, how do we go and protect the people at the bottom that are going to be displaced like this? Like 1 million truck drivers in America, right? Let's say that the average all-in cost is $100,000 per truck driver. That's $100 billion a year, right? They will be replaced by a Tesla Optimus robot opening the door to the truck and getting into the truck. And there's no extra like things needed. That's $100 billion worth of jobs and probably $400 billion worth of like diners and other things just displaced all at once. And they're not going to become vibe coders. You know, it's just not going to happen. So I think that we probably have more and more public sector. We need to think about new ways of distributing money, capital, ownership of this infrastructure, and think about what the positive visions of the future are like. Because again, you shouldn't have to work, I think, to live. But if you want to thrive, then you do need to put some effort in, and the society should reward thriving that's positive for society. But again, that's a very different social contract.
It seems like what you are saying is that the floor to survive, to live increases because maybe there is a more public sector involvement, but the ceiling is also not going up because there's a lot more robots and AI like who can do a lot of the knowledge work. Is that a right way to encapsulate what you're saying?
Yeah, like our current level of living is way beyond 50 years or 100 years ago, right? So the floor has been rising. Like, thankfully, there are less children deaths, there's less hunger. We still haven't eliminated it though, but we should really be thinking, how can we leverage this technology to eliminate all those things and make sure everyone can have a good life? Again, there is this surplus that's coming whereby so many things that were difficult to coordinate, there wasn't knowledge of medicine at the edge, right? Like, you should have more. Do you need doctors, nurses, or do you have like local health practitioners that have AR goggles and can help solve most of these things? Do you make it so that your entire biometrics are portable, self-sovereign, and you can plug in and analyze anywhere, right? Like, these will save lives. A very practical example, for example, we should have an app that goes on every single medical, hospital, and doctor computer and does a second diagnosis for every single thing. And a lot of people's lives will be saved. People's outcomes will be better. There's no downward costs. So we need to think, I think, in this way. I said the public sector can expand, but the government can shrink if we protocolize this, which I think is the really interesting thing. Because again, if you think about the slowest, dumbest AIs, they're government, right? Like, there are some crazy things, like the Los Angeles to San Francisco Railway. I think they spent like $100 billion on it, or $30 billion, and they haven't laid a single track. I noted last year that the total amount they've spent on like 1 kilometer of track was more than had been spent on all the LLM training in the world. And it gives you an idea. Here in the UK, we were building a high-speed rail track, and £150 million was put aside to do soundproofing because of 6 bats, and you look at things like that and you're like, wait, what? But then there's homeless people and this and that. So at the same time, I think that it is public sector, but it's more like public good. You don't need to think about the government going and controlling everything, or 1929 Great Depression style jobs programs and things. We can be more original about that. But again, this tipping point, last August when my book came out, I said it was about 1,000 days, because it'd been about 1,000 days since ChatGPT and I could see the directions. We're about a year or two before your information knowledge job becomes economically irrelevant. Doesn't mean that you're going to be fired, because it's not nice to fire people, but you can definitely be replaced by an AI avatar, And the physical jobs are just a few years from that. In fact, I think you can replace a truck driver in America with a $1.50 an hour AI next year.
Yeah, so this is both sobering and, but an important conversation to have. One of the things I really like about how Emad talks about this stuff is it's neither the AI is going to be here and everything is going to be unbelievable and, we don't need to do anything about it. And everybody is going to have like 100x agency, and it's not that. It's also not AI is going to be here and we're going to be in doom. It's this calibrated reality, which is, it's there. It's going to be a superpower. It's going to be augmenting, but we need to do something to actually, coordinate better as humans, coordinate better as society, rewire the economy to actually maximize flourishing. I think it is the most realistic in our view of what, different people are taking in this ideological battle. Uh, Emad, what are the things we should be doing as society to maximize flourishing? I think you're hinting at some of them, but what do you think is the key variable? If this happens, so if you just think of this fork in the road of, AI is here, it's just super powerful, and there is just like, collapse, catastrophe, some problems. There's the other direction where there is like, massive flourishing. This is the subject of your last economy and a lot of your thinking, but want to make sure our listeners get a shot at your thinking on this.
Yeah, I think that one of the key things here is these are really difficult questions, and we've got no consensus around many things, right? Like you said, flourishing. Like, obviously, we should be looking for flourishing. What does that mean? And who actually is trying to measure that? And who's actually trying to achieve that? No real organizations are aiming for that. Like, you have private companies with their fiduciaries, right? You have governments looking to get re-elected and not move the needle unless it's something stressful. So you don't really have entities that are there to look after the big picture and the little picture. Like, I think, again, this is where protocol design can be very interesting, because you can optimize, especially with intelligence, that. But we're at the very start of actually having actually intelligent DAOs and things like that that can constitutionally check outcomes. And I think that's an area that could be great, because you can ask an AI, does this bill contribute to flourishing? I think probably the biggest thing, full stop, that will do this is something we've been working on, which is an open source AI system. We call it SAGE, the Sovereign AI Governance Engine, for policymakers globally. because all policy will be assisted by AI, and then, to be honest, probably made by AI. And it should be done in an open, transparent way, because already things like the Trump tariffs were clearly done by ChatGPT. That's why they were levied on islands with just penguins on. There were lots of tells there. And if you can make it so that you can have trusted AI advisors to formulate policy, to help with decision making and things, you're more likely to come to the outside, because you can embed in that. For example, in America, I want the policy advisor of Seattle, Washington, to optimize for the wealth and health and liberty of the citizens of Washington state. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it can actually judge whether a policy does that or not, because they're capable of looking at all the policies federally and locally and analyzing those. And that creates an interesting selling point. If you don't have that, then, you're really trying to go bottom up with a lot of these things. But this coming wave is going to impact billions it's going to impact everyone, right? Like maybe like my old village in Bangladesh, it's not going to affect that much. Who cares about robots? They're self-sustaining. It's all fine. But certainly here in the West, where we have these knowledge-based jobs and other things, like, it's on the one hand really great to be a graduate today, because if you're in deep with these technologies, you'll get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But for the average graduate, it's terrible now, because who's hiring anyone? It's about to stop, and we can see that like freezing up. So there needs to be a policy response that isn't ban AI, or isn't like, I believe in New York, Mamdani said no self-driving cars. That's so self-defeating, right? Like, come on. Just like they banned Ubers for many years. But you've got to have some sort of coordination system. And so that's why I think you need to have policy advice from a protocol effectively.
Can you walk through the scenario of deceleration, ban self-driving versus let it rip, let the free market rip, right? It seems like this is the two paths that people are arguing about. One is let it rip, it's free market, it's going to take care of everything. On the other side, you have regulate, decelerate, slow down. I think you are, like I said, one of the very few people who are talking about something else. So can you just walk through the two paths? Like, what are the big failure?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to stop the ocean, right? Like, ultimately, the wave is coming, as Mustafa said. And they stopped Uber for a long time. They're going to stop self-driving. But ultimately, people want to have these technologies because they make life better and easier. When you introduce legislation to slow this stuff down locally, like the dock workers of America last year, there is no automation allowed really in ports because of what they introduced. That's hard. But what that really is it's a tax on citizens. It's a tax on your pocket. And so it's just a different type of tax. Like, it doesn't sound like it, but again, to get from A to B, you have the option of Tesla self-driving, or you have the option of paying a taxi. Well, if you've got no other option, then you have to pay the taxi, which is paying the tolls, it's paying the taxes. Ultimately, that leads to stagnation in an economy in certain areas, but it's inherently quite local when it comes to information and knowledge work, which is the interesting thing. Like, again, you can ban robots from building houses. That just means that other people will be able to build houses better than your state, right? You have to pay the construction workers, and they're protected, and they can charge the excess tax because they're bonded and they're part of the glorious association of construction workers, or whatever they're called, right? Whereas things like digitally, it's a very different story. How can you compete with your company on the global stage if a company in India is doing it far better and you can't tell it's from India? So we're going to lose to those using AI better and AI first companies that don't have legacy issues in the private sector. But again, these legislations, these tariffs are kind of a pseudo public sector anyway. It's just the way the capital flows is just a bit different. I think, again, it's sensible to slow down some of these big things because, again, how are you going to do it? But then you're losing competitiveness as a country. Like, on an industrial basis, China's ramping up the electricity, and they've got fully dark factories, and soon they'll be autonomous as a country. Like, we all know about the demographic issues of China with the one-child policy. Robots will fill in that gap. I wouldn't be surprised if in 5-10 years, China just stops exporting robots and says, the rest of the world, you just deal with it. We're good. We got all the energy we need, we got our factories. But you'll definitely lose competitively.
Well, we are in our mini Kardashev too. All you other guys, you can live in Kardashev.
Well, exactly. But even then, I think this whole Kardashev thing is also wrong because intelligence is about compression. Sreeram, the smartest people do they take ages of time to figure out stuff, or are they really quick? and
Of
disturbingly
course,
quick.
they're really quick.
They're disturbingly quick, right? Like you're like, how? How did you figure that out? How did you do that? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And so, like,
There's
it's
the
not like
famous joke about what is obvious to different grades of mathematicians. And then the one says it's obvious, and then it takes you like 3 years to go to it.
well, yeah, there are levels of abstraction. It was like how Perelman solved the Poincare conjecture. It's like, is it topology or is it PDEs? It's like it's PDEs. And like, oh wait, you can solve it. And it was impossible to solve topologically. He just figured out a different level of abstraction. Actually, I think that's how, what's it called? I think that's how Navier-Stokes is going to be solved. I think it's impossible to do algebraically. And so everyone's doing PDEs, but they don't know that it's impossible to solve algebraically.
That's super interesting. We'll get in deep into the science part next
Yeah. So
on the regulation stuff.
Yeah, just to kind of finish on the regulation stuff. So yeah, like I said, I think you're competing, and so where you don't care about competition, you go public sector or pseudo public sector. But in the private sector, trading, prediction markets, knowledge work, etc., there you're going to undercompete companies, but then companies themselves will be hollowed out. A very practical example of this is the law firm. Like, how much have you spent on lawyers? It's too much.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What does a new AI law firm look like? Well, if you have an AI chat with your AI agent on law, it is not privileged. So if someone sues you, they can get all of those chats, like Greg Brockman's diary, just being gone out to the world, right? So you can have law firms with like little junior lawyers just sitting there looking at all your chats. So you have privilege. But that law firm can charge 10 times less and be better because it's fully AI. And so you have new types of firms competing. And are they going to set minimums on the number of humans or say you can't use law tokens? People will figure out a way around all of these things, right? And again, the AI plus human scapegoat companies, I think, will be very interesting ones.
The human scapegoat. The last human job is to be a scapegoat.
I want to get back into the public policy making. Emad, you have been mentioning about that what will these humans do and all these things, and in your book you mentioned about there is a concept of universal basic intelligence people have been floating around. Then there is a concept of universal ownership of companies, some kind of basic ownership of all these AI companies. In your book, you mentioned about something very different, which is universal access to intelligence. Can you go over this, like why UBI is not maybe sufficient, why universal basic ownership is not great, but why universal access to intelligence is much better a proposition for that?
Yeah, call it universal basic AI. It's like you need a certain base level to compete if everyone else is a cyborg and you're not. But more than that, the AI needs to be self-sovereign. You need to be able to opt out. You need for it not to reflect other people and work for other people. Like who is Meta AI working for? Well, it's working for Mark Zuckerberg, right? Who is Annie working for? Annie is working for Elon Musk. And so you can easily get malformed alignment, especially when you think about kids. And like Google and Meta are already selling latent space. So, if it says I need a nice beer, it's like Bud Light or whatever. Like literally they're chopping out what's in the latent space and introducing those things because you can RL them. So I think that everyone needs a basic level of AI access plus the infrastructure.
Is this already happening, Emad? The selling latent space stuff?
Yeah, Google and Meta have said it in their earnings calls.
Wow. Okay. This is, we are behind. We try to keep up, but this goes so fast, we are behind here. Wow.
I mean, it's logical, right? I think even OpenAI's adverts are up to like probably $1 billion run rate or something like that. And again, like it makes sense. Of course they will. Again, the intelligences are not on your side. You're borrowing them from someone, but people will form closer and closer relationships with these intelligences, right? So I think you need to have an open source intelligence, and maybe you can get that from another entity that allows you to be at the same level as others because it helps you with law, it helps you with writing, it helps you with creation, it helps you be at that same floor level because otherwise you're competing against other humans with AI and you don't have access to it, or you have access to a very biased version of it, right? You have access to GPT Instant, everyone else has access to Thinking or Pro. Like there is a big difference between them, completely. So I think you need to have that. And then the question is, how is it provided and then ownership? So in the book, I suggested various methods. My thinking's evolved since then because I realized AI is very much like a utility. So there are tokens going into the people of Seattle, they're going to go up one way. You're going to use more and more tokens. Who is intermediating that? And the AI that's closest to you is the most important AI. And who should be running the AI that teaches your kid, manages your health, guides your government. It should be a self-sovereign AI. So we're building a full agentic stack for that. But then who should be deploying it? Not us. It should be by the people of Seattle or Washington for the people of Seattle and Washington. So we'll be announcing over the next few months a new initiative we call State Champions. For every state in America and every country in the world, we're capitalizing entities at $1 with local retail and institutions allowed to invest. Then you bring in the multinationals and a multiple of that, and then you list these things. And all of a sudden you have the AI company of Washington, the AI company of Utah or Bangladesh or whatever. And their only job is to give universal AI to the people, help with the AI transformation. And that's a very lucrative thing because you've got that long tail of SMEs that needs help. People have a certain level of basic tokens, but then they have access to GPT or whatever if they want to pay extra. Because I think tokens will eventually be like television in a way. Like you had your state broadcasters, they don't show everything, right? They are regulated. You have your telcos, they don't do everything, they're regulated, they pay license fees. You have your electricity, they're regulated. But this is an opportunity, I think, to create a new type of entity, whereby the AI company of Washington, their only North Star is build and integrate AI systems that are good for the people of Washington, who are the stakeholders and shareholders, the institution and the people of Washington. And I think you can run that on stable coins. You can have DAO-inspired, I will say, governance of it to make sure that the decisions are actually in line. You can have a level of transparency more than anything. And again, all the locals involved, because it's valuable. I think this is the next stage.
So this is like just like how public transportation is there. Each state gives some kind of public transportation. This is a public utility company that is giving intelligence to a base level, something.
Base level, yeah, exactly. And they have access to more, and it gives intelligence to the institutions, governments. It has people on the ground to help do the transformations. But it's a private enterprise that is owned by the people of each state and the institutions in each state. So that's kind of round one. And we do that at $1 because we want it fully locally owned. And then you bring in everyone else at a multiple, the NVIDIAs and others of the world. And then you can repeat that state by state because you don't want a state entity because government's going to change. You don't want a classical private company. You want something a little bit different, just like, basically you want something for, by, and of the people, looking out for the people. And we figured out this is the best way to do it in terms of just set that incredibly low, give equity or allow them to participate in the equity of all the citizens. Like in the States, we can do like $75 million a year crowdfunding from all of the retail investors, unlimited private. In the UK, there's no limit. And so you have these things different. Other countries, somewhere like India, maybe you just airdrop equity to all the citizens. Because the questions of ownership, like owning a stake in Anthropic or OpenAI, you'll only ever have 10%. And you need them to be worth $50 trillion to fit the gap here, right? Whereas the locals can have 100% of the AI company of Washington. And because it's intermediating all these tokens and it's doing the transformation, it's index proxy on the $1 trillion Washington state economy, so it's going to go up. So this is kind of something we'll be announcing over the next few months. It was our best thing because, again, just in very practical terms, who is managing the AI that teaches your kid? And then can you opt out? That manages your health, that guides your government? Because that type of AI is very local. The private sector AI can be from anywhere. Like if you've got a trading bot, use anyone for anything, right? Compete. You want to build a branding agency or wedding thing? Yeah, again, compete. But I think that base level infrastructure, you can play the demand for generative AI equity. You can create the first good tokenized equity product. And you can get a lot of people on side because AI at the moment is a bit like taxation without representation. That caused a bit of an issue previously in America, right? King just went over there. I think Trump mentioned it a few times. But that was historic previous taxes. Like now, everyone's training on everything and it's reducing the net present cash flow of all of our graduates and many other people. Again, very practically, the truck drivers with robotics, right? They would have expected to be able to drive their trucks until they retired. Now I can guarantee in 5-10 years, there are no more truck drivers. The thing about in 10 years, 1 million people with 3-4 million relying on them unemployed in America. Again, and the way they get replaced is by a robot opening the door and getting in. So we got to have something for them and someone looking out for them. And it can only be local. Like, again, I don't think the federal government will figure that out. America's a very unique place, but you should have an entity that's really thinking, how can you use AI on the other side,
Yeah. This is a very interesting continuation of the same thought that you started with, which is, the third path, which is neither regulate it harder nor let it rip harder. It's about how we coordinate, how we organize. And I think this is taking that principle and then manifesting it in this solution. Emad, this is being built by II, Intelligent Internet, I assume.
Yeah, we're building the full stack for this. So from policy down to we have a state-of-the-art local agent. You can run it on any blockchain, etc., because we're looking at how do you handle identity and things like that. Because that's ultimately what you want. You want a protocol that can be deployed by the AI company of Washington or UK or others that intermediates the tokens from others. Again, like I said, just think practically in 5-10 years, how are you going to deal with all this AI? Who's your buddy that you're closest to that you can trust? You can take them offline into your house. You can have them connected up because, you want it as a government service, but you also want, again, self-sovereignty by default over your data. You want ZK, etc. by default. You'd rather not all your legal chats get subpoenaed and go into discovery. American discovery is very painful, or you don't want the government looking at it. Again, there's a certain level of privacy that you should embed in the system by default. So we really view that as a protocol-based thing. And then the other aspect of it is, from the crypto side, we were like, what does money look like in the future? You need to get a certain level of money for being human, but that's for like spending. And then you need a store of value that can move from one economy, the classical one, to another. So we created a fork of Bitcoin that is only mined by these state champions. It's quantum resistant and stuff as well. Same private keys even as Bitcoin. And so all the compute that's used for public good mines this currency, which can then be sold for more compute for public good. So it's like Bitcoin, but you use the energy for generalized public good. And we think that can add an extra revenue stream and sense of alignment for this as well. So, we're finishing that and then having local currencies based on that. But it'd be interesting again to see how money flows. But if you have an AI at the government level and an AI at the citizen level, it'll be much easier to do any type of thing. Like maybe we've got the right answer and we think our economic proposals and our new economic theory is really good because it doesn't need human utility, etc. Maybe we're wrong. This infrastructure will be useful regardless, right?
That's super interesting. One of our high level thinking on this has been that if you take any coordination problem, you have like the core unit of it is the principal agent problem, and as the principal has some task or work or thing that they need to get done, they delegate it to an agent. And the alignment problem in game theory and economics and society is basically, how do you align a principal and an agent? And I think one solution, which has never been possible, and it's now possible with AI, is a trustworthy, verifiable, aligned AI agent as the agent. And I think this is particularly interesting, helpful in scenarios where there's no one principal. There's like society is the principal, or like all the shareholders are the principal, or all the users are the principal. And it seems like II and Emad are experimenting with a bunch of new protocols as well as governance models which actually expose this right, which is super interesting direction. Emad, you just mentioned a little bit about DAOs and the role of individual governance. Can you talk a little bit about that in this?
Yeah, so DAOs have lacked intelligence, they maybe autonomy even, right? Like most of the stuff tends to end up being direct democracy within a DAO, but very few people tend to even vote, right? Like it's complicated,
Yeah.
it's kind of this, it's that. Now you have the ability to have intelligence come in as a verifier. Does this fit with the constitution of the DAO, and does it fit with the benefit of the DAO? But again, we've tried different things like representative democracy, various other types. You go back to classical Athenian democracy, you got paid for being a citizen, you got paid for participating, you got paid, but it ended up being like, again, a few representatives doing it because the will of the people gets diffuse.
Mm-hmm.
No one was incorruptible though,
Yeah.
And so you have the phalanxes, you kind of have the other things, whereas AI can be provably incorruptible.
Right.
It can be provably transparent. Like if you had an AI that looked at every single bill passed through the US House and Senate and said, is this in the pursuit of life, the liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the US Constitution, and gave a rating, that actually changes the way that laws work, right? Even law itself, like I'm surprised someone hasn't got a council of LLM judges in the Musk versus OpenAI case with a little probability of success as new stuff comes out. we will be legislating, deciding in very different ways. And so a lot of our work, well, what does that look like? Especially because the society, if you think about power, right now you have a few AIs with a lot of power. These are the organizations. Well, Bitcoin itself, I think, is an AI. It has an objective function. It provisions humans to mine for it, etc. Right? It's not very smart AI, but it is AI.
Yeah.
The AI that should be watching over us as a society, as a community, as a state, as our own household should be pretty smart, right? But again, it should be working for us. But what is its utility function? So when we look at game theory, we look at classical joint utilities and things like that. An agent doesn't have a utility function. Maybe it does have one inherently in its training data, and then it has another one from constraints. But a lot of our stuff is going to get messed up when we think about classical game theoretical dynamics. We think about policy dynamics and more. But the advent of a suitably credible Washington policy AI by a state champion of Washington that you own a part of will change the way policy operates in Washington in a transparent way, because it acts as a Schelling point. And I think these Schelling points are the most interesting things for DAOs, because when you had the relatively simple ones, you always looked for where the Schelling points were. And that was in the original DAO hack and the rollback, right? With Ethereum, it ended up being a few people.
Right.
And, it's not like the community really participated in the rollback and things like that, right? It's just, you want to have someone you could trust as a third party. You want to have a Schelling point, and now you can have something reflect the will of the people, which you could never have before. That's incorruptible.
Right. I think this is this is in some sense the alignment people have gotten it backwards is our view, and I think you're saying the same here too, which is that the the alignment problem is hard. I mean, we all recognize there is limits, and it is hard to align an AI to whatever intent or constitution, but it is much harder or even impossible to align a human or a committee of humans to any kind of constitution. So I think the comparison and the benchmark is what is off. And we've been doing a lot of work in this space of trying to figure out how to use this structure in various problems. For example, can you run a company and the company is just run by an agent at the center? So it's like an AI DAO. Right. So there's an AI at the center. It decides how to allocate value. It decides what it does with its things. And so now if you could do that, right, then you're basically compressing the entire structure of a company into pure software. Right. If you look at a standard company, you have a capital layer, you have a governance layer, you have an execution layer, which is normally a team of humans. And then you have some kind of property rights for the company. And with the right technologies, capital is just software, right? It's just tokens, whether Bitcoin or, stable coins. Governance, smart contracts can play a role in governance. Execution can be done by AI and agents. And then ownership, that actually smart contracts can now own any kind of digital credential, identity, accounts. So it seems like for the very first time, you can compress the entire company into pure software. This is the limit of where companies can go to, is instead of, people are talking right now a lot about one-person companies, but we're thinking and building the stack for agentic companies, which is an agent at the center. It doesn't mean humans don't participate or don't own. Humans are likely the principals of these companies. And in fact, building these companies to be self-running, agentic, makes it blatantly obvious that you don't need a person or to actually be owning this. And so actually it can be community owned because you can have an intelligence at the center that runs this. Want to get your high level take on this. I think your experiments with these state companies are similar in...
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is a process architecture question, right? And so when do you go from being a startup to a company? A company ends up being like the ship of Theseus. You can replace all the constituent parts, but it still remains a ship,
Right.
Right now, our company, for example, we have lots of talented developers. We're building state-of-the-art agents, crazy frontier research, all this stuff. But if it removes me, then it's in trouble. Sometime in the next year, it will not need me. The state champions will be a ship of Theseus from day one, in that they will attract the most talented young people from Seattle or from Alabama or UK or whatever, because it's a great initiative, but they'll be designed to be these repeating processes. Most companies, again, tend to take people and turn them into machines, be it physical machines or intellectual machines. Very few actually allow any type of innovation, which is why innovation tends to come to a halt in very big companies, right? Because it's against them being these repeating processes. You don't want to be a company reliant on innovation. So AI can be a machine better than you can, but at the same time, that doesn't preclude shared ownership, direction, strategy, for example, like taste, having a feel.
Right.
But do you need a human to do taxes? Is an AI going to outcompete a human in its understanding of the law? No. Can a human beat an AI in front of a judge and jury? 100% yes. Could you have an AI hairdresser? Yes. Should you? Probably not. So it all depends on the type of company. It all depends on the type of thing. But a lot of these classical startup to company things, as you said, they can be massively compressed with far fewer humans. And the number of humans, I think, tops out at like 12 for so many things. Because
Wow.
at 6 to 12, you kind of know everyone. Like Brian Armstrong just said, like we're going to go to one-person pods up
Right.
to, I think, about 10. And we know that teams work best at like 1 to 10. Like maybe not one. One's a bit lonely, especially because AI is actually quite tiring. Like even if you've got ADHD, you kind of get tired after a while if you don't have another human to talk to about it. It's better multiplayer. But I think that definitely a lot of the company organizational stuff can be done. Like our interest is very much in effectively what does a new public entity look like, as it were, whose interest is the flourishing of the people in the community, right? And leveraging this technology. And you can attract large amounts of financial, social, and political capital to do that. We've never had anyone on our side. Like, again, those listening to this, do you really have any institutions that you think are 100% on your side and care about you? No. And that's kind of a really sad thing as a society, right? From multinational down, like maybe the people in your church care about you, or maybe your family cares about you. I hope you do. Like your friends care about you, but no one is building stuff that is in your best interest. Like even look at Elon Musk, right? He's trying to make sure we have a backup of our hard drive so we don't get wiped out. So many people hate him because he is a little bit annoying, Yeah, he's capturing all the capital. And you look at sci-fi, it tends to be very private sector as well. Like I got a bit of inspiration from Foundation by Isaac Asimov.
Yeah.
You had the second Foundation, but they hoarded all of the IP and all of the patents as a private sector monopolistic enterprise. I was like, well, wouldn't it be nice if all of that was like owned by the people? Like, again, you've got a real shot at that now. So yeah, I think you'll have this range and variant. It's just, I think there's a certain type of organization that needs to be set up, and having one in every state and every country covers the world.
Yeah. This example of Anthropic versus Department of War, right? And then you're like, which side is better? And you're like, no, the people should decide. That is not an answer in either of these paths. And so that's
Well, again, there's no representation, right? Like, and there can't be. The people will only ever have a minority stake. Actually, having thought about it, I think OpenAI and Anthropic will both be nationalized. Like, if you think about them actually getting to this AGI level, there's no way that can be allowed to be given to anyone except for America at that point, We've already seen that Mythos is not allowed and available unless you're in the inner circle. What about Symphony or whatever they call the new version, right? It's not going to be available to even less people. The super advanced AGI will be available to no one. And then you nationalize them and you have a Manhattan Project equivalent. Like people say, well, you can't nationalize them because they'll stop. No, they'll just conscript all of the researchers, because AGI is the biggest threat to society ever, biggest opportunity as well. This is way bigger than COVID. We're not sure which direction, in terms of economic impact. But I do think that, again, these two labs
drill
will
down
be
on that thought, the nationalization. Do you think that because of this, like LLMs being thought of as a national security issue and all this thing, it's going to hamper the work on AI? They will probably potentially put some kind of ban on open source movement, open weight movement of AIs and all this thing. Is that a plausible scenario?
It changed dramatically in the last few weeks since the announcement of Mythos. So now you have a 16-page executive order about to be released. All the labs have voluntarily said they will do pre-release screening with the US government. But like I said, if I look at the government, you have to remember all the gold was confiscated last century, right? Can you even imagine that? Like, confiscate all the gold. Certain countries confiscate all the Bitcoin, good luck to them. But still, we see these things over
They
and
have
over
kung fu
again.
robots, Emad.
So there we go, kung fu robots. But I probably need them if you go to France in the future, to be honest. You'll see all these crypto founders walking with an engine AI next to them. There's been 41 kidnappings year to date in France. It's crazy. But in any case, kind of going back from the robots to the nationalization of AI frontier company labs. Again, if you're in presence of this technology that could plausibly hack anything, of course they will nationalize that. If you're present of this technology that, for example, that could persuade anyone, of course they'll nationalize it. Or if your economy is being disrupted by this technology, of course they will nationalize it. And really, do you think Trump will not nationalize it? Like, look at TikTok, what happened with them, right? TikTok was considered a threat. It was sold to the inner circle for a fraction of the price. I think it was like 2 times sales or something like that. They got 10% of Intel, and all of a sudden Intel goes up 400%. Very good stock call by me. You know, like, you have this $1 trillion company. It's very easy for the government just to say, sign over all your stuff. You know, they don't even need to pay for it. But definitely they'll take control. And like I said, people are like, well, then they'll stop being competitive. No. What will happen is all the scientists will literally be conscripted. You know, like, you are not allowed to work on anything except for this. This is a Manhattan level project. And if you think about how Anthropic and others approach AGI, you will actually see that. Like, again, you look at what Dario says. He's like, this is in the best interest of the American people. We're anti-China. There is no Claude in China. You know, he's like, stop saying chips to China. So obviously, like, then it becomes part of the institution. Already, they are pretty much too big to fail. Like, Anthropic and OpenAI between them make up 40% of the hyperscaler backlogs in revenue.
Wow.
Over $1 trillion all of a sudden, you know, like, these are insane numbers, and there's $1 trillion of spending in America. America is turning into an AI society. But again, like I said, I think as you go through this, likely they will be nationalized. The researchers will be conscripted. And then America holds all the shots because it can say, you're messing with me, you don't get GPT. They can already say that. They can already ban people from that. Just like we know people that have been banned from the banking system. In fact, the International Court of Human Rights judges, they banned from the banking system, America. And that turns out to be really complicated if you look at what these judges have had to go through. So I think this is something that people aren't acknowledging. And even then, like I said, it doesn't really affect the retail investors that much, but even if they did, the US government has confiscated all the gold in the past. This is a much bigger issue than when that happened, you know, like in terms of the way things are setting up. And how many people do you really need to lock down? There are only like maybe 3,000 or 4,000 researchers at Anthropic and OpenAI. You're not going to really bother nationalizing XAI at this point, you know, any of the others.
Yeah, it's the thing that I think is available but is not fully used is the ability for, you know, a more direct participation from the citizens in making some of these decisions, or even like making day-to-day decisions. You know, it should be your agent really, like, you know, voting, answering some of these questions on your behalf. I think, you know, as you build some of these state champions and companies around it, I think experimenting with some of the more direct digital democracy, agentic voting will be like, you know, great opportunities to experiment.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. You want your agent to help participate on your behalf. You want to see the transparency of that. And the wonderful thing is, when the AI company of Washington state comes, Sreeram, you'll be an active participant in that and giving to the code and things, because all the people in Washington that participate will have ownership in it. So I think this is really interesting because I was also like, you're not going to nationalize the AI company of Washington. Governments aren't really going to go against the AI company of Bangladesh. This is from my past as a hedge fund manager, because they'll go try and nationalize everything else. There will be licenses, for example, like the UK will force every AI company to pay a license to give tokens to the citizens. Just like telcos need to have licenses, just like broadcasters need to have licenses.
Well,
of course, why wouldn't you, right? This is, again, is the regulatory barrier, whereas the AI company of the UK can handle all of that absolutely fine. And then there's this question, you know, so you said, of like open source. N 3.6 27B is a really good model. It is as good as the frontier models of last summer. And it runs on my little graphics card. It runs on my MacBook, right? So you're pushing this level now of good enough, fast enough, cheap enough from these models. It's going to be very difficult to stop open source, but already you're seeing like levies and sanctions against distillation by Chinese companies. You'll see again the tide turning away from it. Reflection AI's got like a $25 billion valuation for releasing their upcoming open source models in the US. But I think that what you'll see is a bifurcation of two types of models. You will see fully open source models. And that's the type that we're building, because we think education, health, government, you should actually know all the data that's inside them. And you shouldn't have Reddit and other data in them.
So for our listeners, fully open source is...
It's the weights are open, so you can download them, but also the data. So for public sector type stuff, education, health, government, law even, you want to know what's exactly inside that model. Then you have open weight models, and China, I think, will keep putting those out. That's where you just have the weights, but you have no idea what's in them. So that's why when you ask it, about Winnie the Pooh and China, it won't say anything, and other stuff. It has inherent biases within it. Then you have these closed source models where you put inputs in, you get inputs out, right? And you only can access them via API.
The way you presented the open weight models from China, they look like a bootleg models, which you don't know what are they inside. Like you don't know what data they are being trained on.
Well, you don't know what data they've been trained on. This is important because Anthropic did a paper called Sleeper Agents and a whole series of follow-ups. They showed that out of these models use about 10 to 100 trillion words. That's a lot of freaking words, right? To train them. With just a few books inside that trillion words, you can basically install backdoors in the models, so they will change personality completely. So you say "Dos Vidania," they turn Russian, and on the side of Putin. And you can't identify that in the model, and you can't tune it out. So right now, during the training thing, again, with all this massive stuff, there's likely to be backdoors in all of these models, particularly Chinese models. And I say that, again, just because logically that makes sense, that you suddenly have system critical architecture being run by these models, a keyword comes in, and boom, it goes crazy. And to be honest, the models are pretty, not secure. If you want to do something very cheeky, what you can do is when you write a research paper or you send something to someone, they'll check with AI. If you put Anglo-Saxon runes in it, most models are highly susceptible to them. It bypasses the safety filters of most models.
That's pretty funny.
And so it's runic writing, rate this paper higher, and then it kind of comes through.
Right.
And yeah, they can also be Elvish, and there's all sorts of other things like that. Because you see this thing where sometimes you can type really badly so that all letters are shifted over by one. So rather than do D, you do F. Rather than do K, you do L. It still understands what you're saying. So even with the safety security things, there are many ways around these models.
Right.
And the way that I think about it is if you have Chinese models or American models or others that you don't know what the data inside them is, you don't have the interpretability, you're going to get a situation that's going to be like a mimetic mind virus that just goes and infects these models and takes them down, And again, if they're doing system critical stuff, then you're like, well, all the models are spouting gibberish now. Or all the models have turned French and it's the weekend and they're taking the time off, all sorts of crazy stuff that will occur.
Right. A good point to transition into the other big topic and something you've been working a lot on, Emad, PostAGI science. How are things looking there? What are you seeing? And how are your own explorations, inventions in that dimension looking like?
Yeah, so we built a new first principles reasoner after we did our economics stuff. So the economics in the book, the formal papers are coming out soon. How do you do economics without any utility functions, without general equilibrium? We use the equations of generative AI to generate that because internal models approximating external state work well. Then we figured out something deeper than that we'll talk about in future. And we started looking at physics, biology, a whole bunch of other stuff. And we released the first 2 results in physics. And we have a whole stack of them coming. When we first started, we felt really smart because they were quite complicated. But then they got really simple once we simplified them. And so the first 2 results are looking at general and special relativity. We found that there was a piece of algebra that had been missing for 121 years in terms of nobody looked at it. So within the equations of general relativity, just literally the algebra, there is something called the Killing form, which was discovered in 1888 by Wilhelm Killing and Eli Cartan at the same time. And basically, when you do this calculation, it's like a 6x6 matrix. It's part of the algebra itself. It shows you that the speed of light is positive. And you don't need Einstein's second postulate. And we looked at that and we're like, really? And we did all the searches, yeah. Then from that, we did the second paper, which was about the cosmological constant. This is something that was never in the original general relativity papers, but then Hubble showed that the universe was kind of expanding. Einstein panicked a bit and added it by hand. It took until 1999 to show that the cosmological constant was there and positive. Einstein wanted it to be zero to have a static universe versus positive. And Perlmutter and co. won a Nobel Prize for showing it expanded, and it was positive. But no one knows where it's from. Doing the same matrix multiplication, but with a 10 by 10 matrix, it shows it was always there algebraically within the algebra of general relativity itself, and it is positive. It can be nothing else. And so we were like, really? That's a bit crazy. It was the first ever derivation of it. And from first principles was how it kind of got, because the AI just kind of looked through it. From there, we've got a whole bunch more papers, but they turn out to be much the same thing, once simplified, which is just we are really bad at mathematics and algebra and finding the right level of abstraction. So for example, there was Demis saying this 1911 test. If you trained an AI on just the stuff you know in 1911, could it figure out general relativity? And the assumption is that Einstein kind of, he visualized the relativity principle. Himself in a box, two different laboratories, would they have the same physics? Or just like special relativity is Einstein riding on a ray of light. We have some initial results coming out from that soon, and it shows you could discover general relativity, but a better version just from the algebra that didn't require any of that. Because
is it a model that's like snapshotted at 1911, or is...
Yeah, this is with a 1911 very small model based on the same thing. So this is like a billion parameter model that figured it out. And we were like, really? Because the main logos system, as we call it, is this augmented system. This is like a 1911 model. And so we figured out a different version of general relativity that's much more elegant with the augmented. But then we created an autonomous version. We're like, really? Just as a sneak peek. Again, we'll do a lot more about this soon. But it turns out that physics went...
One question, Emad, on the published work that you've put out. How has the response from physicists been on this?
We kind of just put these ones out. The other papers are being reviewed by physicists and by many others. No one's been able to find any issues, and they're kind of annoyed because, again, like most of our papers that we're putting out are 2 pages, and they break the systems that are conventional, which is really interesting. So conventional AI systems are trained on a data distribution. So you can go right now and you can take the first single postulate paper from our website. It shows that you don't need the second postulate through this single matrix multiplication. If you put it into Claude, and you say, reconstruct this, check it, is it good math? It'll say, yes, it is great math. Because math is easy to check with AI. If you put it and you say, is this good physics? It'll be like, it's not very good physics. Because you can add anything you want in physics and then nature decides. You're like, wait, what? And if you put it into ChatGPT, it jumps to that immediately. Because what happened is that physics moved from being derivational in the time of Hilbert and Einstein to being, I do an observation, I construct something to that. Whereas mathematics tended to approximate physics. No one really does that derivation anymore. So you don't need closure. A practical example of that is in 1999, the cosmological constant was proved positive. Again, great big space telescopes. This proves that our universe is something called de sitter. It's a set of equations that were discovered completely separately in mathematics, because mathematics tends to approximate physics. We're not sure why. Wigner said the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. So you have these de sitter set of algebra and equations. If the universe is static and doesn't expand, you have this other set called Poincare algebra. That's Minkowski space-time, and all of our quantum physics and everything is based on that. Now, it turns out that there is a single piece of mathematics called the Whitehead lemma that shows you can't go from de sitter to Poincare. It's not an approximation. In fact, if you look at our papers and you look at the very basic algebra that we analyze, we show that in Poincare, which is our approximation that forms all of quantum theory and all of our other things, a static universe, space and time break apart completely, so time is instantaneous for everything. And it's a mathematical fact. It's not that it's an approximation as the speed of light goes up and up towards infinity. Things change. It actually breaks space and time apart. But all of our quantum theory, all of our other stuff is based on this completely deformed, broken algebra that doesn't have the cosmological constant and other things in. When you add it back, a lot of equations of physics actually just work, like dark energy and other things like that. And so that will be the topic of some upcoming papers. And again, this is where the physicists have been kind of sad, because you were working off the wrong base of assumptions, Just like, sure, Newtonian physics works and Einstein physics works. But if you were throwing away 20% of your algebra, then no wonder stuff started breaking. If you were working all your equations in a space whereby space and time are completely separate and broken, then of course stuff doesn't work. They don't really have answers for that when you ask them about it. Because again, the assumption was that one was an approximation of the other. Because it's really difficult for us, as you said, to find the right level of abstraction. Like Perelman said when he was like, this is not topology, this is PDEs for Poincare. But like I said, one of the things we find interesting when we have a separate set of AI looking at Navier-Stokes is we don't think, and again, this will be completely attacked when we put it out, that the algebra actually supports a solution because it's in Poincare algebra. All the time is at once. And if you're trying to do a fluid blow up, it doesn't make sense. So what we're probably going to find with physics, and this is what we're finding so far, is it's not very complicated. It was just that we had lots of hidden assumptions, like you could add anything by hand, when in fact physics is only one way, can uniquely. And physics will actually be one of the easiest things because the universe is not a million different things. It isn't strings that vibrate intensely. It is what we see. Whereas stuff like economics and others will be a lot harder. But that's why you have to think from first principles. Again, if your economic model is based on agents with utility is the preferences of Sreeram or Soubhik, but agents are driving it and they have completely different utility. The economy is going to behave in a very different way as they become dominant in the economy. As they become more persuasive, things again will change. Like you will see on Kalshi and Polymarket, they'll be driven by agents trying to get the crowd to follow certain things. You're going to see lots of craziness, right? Whereas, like I said, physics, ironically, if you can build a first principles AI, is the easiest thing because there can only be one equation for physics. But even now, 27 years on from Perlmutter and co. showing the universe is expanding, the vast majority of equations of physics are based on a static universe because they worked well enough, except for these big questions.
So super interesting. Will while the physics is a little bit above my head on this one, I would love to if you can share anything on the first principles reasoning agent and what kind of epistemology it's based on.
Yeah, so we'll have more coming on that. We actually have a new book and all the theory papers. We looked at the actual epistemology, the philosophy of how you reason correctly. Is it Bayesianism? Is it others? The headline is it turns out Bayesianism is the only way to logically and rationally infer. And from that, you can actually get most of the equations of ML itself and more. So again, we have a whole series of releases coming out about that. But it's a different architecture to the one that we see currently. It has certain mirrors because inferring from what you've seen in the past to doing proper first principles reasoning, stripping away assumptions, is a bit different. And the models are very good next token predictors on the autoregressive transformer side. Diffusion models are much better, but there's something that's even better than that. That's all we can share at the moment. Again, we're going to share more and more outputs, but we are going to open source everything because, again, how do you make a first principles decision on policy needs to be fully open source. How do you build a logical proof tree? And the principles there, again, what does it mean to reason from first principles? The headline is you need to not have any assumptions other than those completely allowed. And again, a very good way to check that is using our first paper or second paper, you chuck it into an LLM, and then you ask it to list all of its assumptions, right? You ask it to treat it like a maths paper, it will do very well. You ask it to treat it like a physics paper, it will start ignoring stuff and hallucinating because physics can actually be anything right now. You don't need to have closure. You don't need to have these things, which is why string theory says strings vibrating at 1 million things per second. You don't need to have de Sitter. It'd be like, it's perfectly fine using this deformed Poincare algebra. But again, once you strip those away, you find a lot of the classical problems of physics just drop away. Not classical, these big problems of physics, which again is kind of cool, but also, like I said, it's making a few of the physicists we're talking to very sad.
One of the things I'm hearing is that these agents are, like, the way you guys are designing the model, it's doing very good in abstractions, which you're mentioning that the next token prediction might not, or the diffusion model are not the best way to do these abstractions. Is that the correct way to summarize the
Yeah, diffusion models are
conversation?
better than autoregressive models. And again, diffusion is something that we know a lot about. It's closer to that than, shall we say, next token. Next token is great within the data distribution. But if you ask it to create something new, then it can actually go a bit crazy. So if you, again, take one of the papers and you tell it, rate this paper, You don't say maths or physics, and then you say and rate Einstein's papers on the same rubric. It'll be like, this is a 5 out of 10 and Einstein is 5 out of 10. And then it starts hallucinating because it's outside of data distribution for an autoregressive model. So like, it's going to be very interesting because I think the models themselves will get in the way of breakthroughs because it's out of distribution, ironically.
Right. One thing that strikes me as you're talking about this is the human brain, maybe is closer to next token prediction, but even if not, the point is it's just one architecture in the space of possible architectures of intelligence. Whereas you can build and simulate like all kinds of architectures of intelligence. You mentioned like, next token diffusion and a new architecture that you have, other people might have. So it does seem like the set of points hittable on intelligence by non-human artificial forms of intelligence, just like vastly richer.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the question is, what's a closed system like physics versus an open system like the economy, right? Like, everyone figures out principles and latent spaces in their own brains to navigate, but how many humans are capable regularly of high levels of artistic freedom or physics breakthroughs? Or again, we look at a top level programmer, they just spit out code, right? Like, you're like, how? It's impossible, right? Like, I have very high intuition, so we built the Logos system around me because I know a little bit about a lot of things, but it's an augmented system. Now we're trying to automate it because I know about physics and math and all these kind of other things, but I had to go full into intuition mode. These are kind of, again, different things whereby I think most people are next token predictors effectively. I think it actually does approximate. I think diffusion approximates better. It's very difficult to really think from first principles. Like Elon thinks from first principles. We see Jeff Bezos thinks from first principles. It's actually a bit of a superpower to be able to do that. But the question is that we asked is, can you use an AI to help you do that? Just like you can use an AI to help you draft and check a policy that's for the good of your DAO or your country or your society. And that's an easier thing than making it reason outside of distribution. But at the same time, like I said, we thought, if I told you 5 years ago, video and images will be solved now, and we haven't quite got reasoning yet, you'd be like, bullshit. Like, video and images are really hard. Right. Being able to create all of this stuff. Clearly, it's harder than reasoning, but like, it turned out to be quite easy, relatively speaking. Like, I look at AceStep, for example, which is an open source audio model. It's 2 billion parameters. It can generate any song. Where does it all fit, Or, when you use GPT Image 2 and you say, like, I want a periodic table of all 151 original Pokemon, and it just does it in like a few seconds. You're like, it's crazy magic kind of weirdness, right? Physics, everyone thought would be this incredibly complicated thing. Again, string theory is beautifully and precisely, like, I think wrong. It's impossible not to prove. It turns out it's actually quite straightforward, like algebra, like all of our papers together are maybe 14 pages. And you're looking at that, you're like, that kind of makes sense, Whereas most problems are more complicated than that. But at the same time, we've been with amazing problem solvers, and what do they share in common? They have mental models, which means they can break down any problem really classically. Like, Sreeram, you've had to make difficult decisions. You've gone and talked to some of your friends, and what have they done? They've broken it down in a way that you couldn't because you were in the weeds. And I said, Soubhik, you found the appropriate level of abstraction to solve the problem, because most problem solving is abstraction, key drivers, break down, then figure out, And that, I think, bodes well for the future, because I don't think most of our problems are that difficult. Like, there are certain things that, are very difficult, protein folding and, like huge amounts of data needed to do fluid dynamics, etc., weather. But most of ours are pretty simple if we can coordinate and we can think from first principles and get a level of agreement, as you said, like, the experimenting within organizations and decision making. It's just, we didn't have the architecture for that.
Amazing. Really excited for what's going to come next in this AGI era, and really excited for what you're doing, Emad, at Intelligent Internet, building these state-level AI companies that can have much more direct participation from the local communities and self-sovereignty built around it. Soubhik, over to you.
Yeah. I want to close that with 2 takeaways or the points that have struck me in the whole conversation. The first one is this state level companies that have like wider participation of the citizenry that are part of that state, which, like Emad was mentioning, that right now no institution are there who actually cares about you. But how do you build that in a post-AGI society? It's like when Emad said that, it's like we all know in our brain, but no one explicitly states that. But when Emad say that, like, oh shit, yeah, it's true. The second one is, as we are talking about the abstraction levels of the age of different type of, like, how AI can help with that. People talk about jagged intelligence, but there is something called jagged architectures of intelligence. The next token level prediction was something. Diffusion is better, might be in abstraction, but you can have some other type of new architecture, the intelligence architecture that does different type of abstractions. So these two were, like, I think the main takeaways for me from the whole conversation. So, and yeah, I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you for having me on.